Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the What If guy, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Issei Summoned a Heroic Spirit. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. It was the dawn of the world, when humanity was only beginning to be aware of itself. This is a story of a human and a seraphim. At first, only heaven and hell existed. Heaven held the throne of God and his 12 seraphims as messengers, and at the other extreme hell was ruled by the 7 demon kings and the 72 pillars. They coexisted in perfect equilibrium because their powers were equal. Everything changed when a significant number of angels were seduced by human women. Angels, who by rule were not to know the sinful feelings of mortals, fell into temptation and, like their minds, their wings darkened. Their communion with their Father in heaven was lost, like the halos above their heads. Taking advantage of the situation, the demons plunged the human world into darkness, and the angels went out to fight to protect the children of creation. Tales of heroism and tragedy followed through the long war. While most humans fled the battles, a few resisted and became the light against the darkness. They were only a handful against the vast demonic army, and their end seemed inevitable. Moved by their courage and pitying their suffering, 3 seraphims descended to earth to aid those brave humans and granted them powers to survive the battles. The force was led by 2 warrior princesses, each commanding a team of 6. Eventually the Creator God lost his radiance, but not before defeating the leaders of the demons and entrusting part of his power to humans on earth. This power, known as sacred gear, was given so humans could defend themselves against supernatural enemies. On Earth, both teams of heroes endured the worst assaults alongside the seraphims. From the mortal struggle, only 1 princess and 1 seraphim survived. Fearful that the last remnants of their companions would be lost, the seraphims sealed their essences in 2 crystal orbs and entrusted them to the princess. As the seraphim prepared for the final fight, she ordered the princess to protect and hide the orbs. Before parting, the princess swore by her life and her soul that she and her descendants would complete the mission and protect those who had protected and helped them. Even if she died and was forgotten, her promise would be eternal and sincere. After receiving the seraphim's blessing, the princess wandered the unexplored lands, far from demons, fallen angels, and angels of heaven alike, until she reached a great island. There she hid in a cave on a mountain. After a truce between the 3 factions, the princess consolidated all her power into the last of her strength to erect a sacred sanctuary accessible only to her and her descendants by a specific key, and she concealed the orbs charged to her by the seraphim. Afterwards she left the sanctuary and descended to a small village that had recently formed, where she lived out the rest of her life as a simple villager, forever forgetting her noble origins, though she always remembered in her heart the friends she had lost. Time passed, and even when the age of the gods ended, the princess's power endured. As promised, each daughter in her family was told this story as a fairy tale and instructed in their important duty. In this way the cave remained protected, generation after generation, down to the present. The alarm clock began to beep. A young woman in casual home clothes stood at the doorway and urged her son to wake up. She opened the curtains and let morning sunlight fill the room. The boy in the bed, no more than 7 years old, tried to keep sleeping, squinting and clutching his eyes shut as the sheets were pulled back to reveal him. The mother lovingly chided him and reminded him it would be a shame to sleep in since he could go play with his friend Irina. At the mention of his friend, the boy sprang up so quickly that he nearly tumbled out of bed, but his mother caught him by the arms and steadied him. He rubbed his eyes and offered a sleepy good morning to his mother. She told him the breakfast was ready and urged him to wash up so he could eat and go play sooner. He replied that he would and dashed out of the room. Later, around the breakfast table, his mother set out the meal while his father sat reading the newspaper. The mother sweetly scolded her husband to stop reading and join them for breakfast. The husband looked up in surprise. Mr. Hyoudou apologized and explained that he had found a promising business opportunity to help pay the house mortgage, so he would be home a little later. He worked as an office employee at a private company. Although his salary was reasonable, the family still carried the mortgage on their land and home. The strain had started because he and Issei's mother had married quickly. Issei's maternal grandfather had not approved of the match. In his youth, Mr. Hyoudou had been seen as a troublemaker for chasing after girls at school. His grades had not been the best, and he had no particular talent. Above all, the fact that his daughter became Argent before leaving school had finally exhausted the grandfather's patience and led him to expel her from the house. Things had looked bleak, but Mr. Hyoudou worked tirelessly to make up for those early weaknesses. Thanks to a parcel of land left by his own parents and a loan from friends, he had managed to build the house where they lived and gradually pay the monthly installments. Issei's mother replied that she understood and would have his food ready and warm when he returned. She was a homemaker who had been unable to attend university because of her Argent, so she devoted herself to their only child and occasionally took part-time jobs to help support the household. While they spoke, both parents heard their son calling out cheerfully that he had finished his breakfast and wanted to go play with Irina. The empty plate made them smile at how fast he ate. Issei's mother allowed him to go but reminded him to stay in the park and not wander to other places, promising she would come by shortly. Mr. Hyoudou ruffled his son's hair and told him to be careful and have fun. As they watched him leave, Issei's mother observed that he had inherited a lot of her energy. Mr. Hyoudou replied that he hoped their son had inherited other good qualities as well, and added that he needed to hurry to work. He also mentioned that they should let the children play a little longer because today was Irina's last day in town. High School Dext, Angelical Dragon Red Emperor. At the park near Issei's home, two children were arguing over a cardboard mask. Irina insisted she wanted to be the red hero. She had violet eyes and light chestnut hair tied in a messy ponytail, wearing a navy sleeveless sports shirt with yellow trim and gray shorts, a light blue jacket tied around her waist, white socks, and slightly worn sneakers. Issei countered that the red suit fit him better and asked Irina to let him be the red hero today. He was dressed in his school sports uniform. They both favored the protagonist's color from the television show even though there were two masks, one yellow and one red. To settle it, Irina suggested that whoever reached the sandbox at the far end of the park first could be the red hero. She put both masks into her jacket pocket and set the rules. Issei declared himself the red whirlwind as he prepared to run. Irina answered that she would prove herself as the ace of the skies, and they counted off before sprinting across the park. Both children ran with everything they had. Irina gained a big lead and teased Issei while looking back, but she tripped on a small mound of dirt and fell onto the ground. Issei laughed at his sudden advantage, but then collided face-first with a tree when he looked forward, producing a solid thud. Irina helped herself up and laughed at the sight, and Issei, about to complain about the bump, began to laugh as well upon hearing his friend's laughter. Their easy camaraderie and constant encouragement of each other were clear. After a short break they resumed the race, but upon reaching the sandbox they found something unexpected. A larger boy of about 10, flanked by two companions, was looming over a small, frightened girl whose clothes were dirty from the sand. The larger boy insisted that they had told others not to enter their territory and that girls were not welcome there. The little girl was terrified and did not answer. One of the children snapped, asking what kind of look that was. The other kids wore malicious smiles, and the tall boy cracked his knuckles while threatening to teach them who was in charge. Issei and Irina exchanged glances and nodded to each other. Each took one of the masks and stepped forward. The bullies told them to stop, and the other children watched. After a brief moment of surprise, the three attackers resumed their malicious grins. The tallest of the group announced they had met again and dismissed them as the red hero and the yellow hero, insisting they would not get away with it this time. Issei and Irina struck the heroic pose they had seen on their favorite show and warned that such mean behavior had to stop and would not be tolerated. The tall boy sneered and called them idiots. Issei and Irina replied that the real fool was the one who bullied others and that wrong actions would be stopped. The bully signaled his friends to attack, and a scuffle began. The confrontation played out like an animated skirmish, quick and exaggerated in its motions. Issei and Irina moved with surprising coordination, using practiced, defensive moves that sent the attackers stumbling and hastily retreating. No one suffered any serious harm, The skirmish ended with the bullies backing away. When it was over, the other children left, including the girl who had been intimidated. After that, the two friends returned to their games and played until evening. Late in the afternoon, Issei and Irina lay on the grass. Irina turned to Issei and asked him a question. Irina looked at the twilight sky with a melancholy expression and told Issei that she would be leaving that afternoon, asking if he would answer something for her before she went. Days earlier, despite knowing the day Irina's family would leave, the two children had agreed not to bring it up so the farewell would not be sad, at Irina's request. Now that Irina had mentioned it, Issei stared at his friend, unsure what to say. Irina admitted she did not understand why her father had to leave so suddenly and that she wanted to stay, go to school with Issei, and be where she belonged. Tears began to run down her cheeks as she confessed that she did not want to leave. Issei answered by pulling his friend into an embrace. He gently told her to calm down and reminded her that this was not a final goodbye. He promised that no matter what happened they would meet again someday, and that if she could not come back to him, he would one day go to wherever she was. Irina looked at him with hope and asked if he really promised. Issei swore on his word and called himself her hero, urging her to stop crying and smile because this separation would be temporary. Irina brightened, wiped her eyes, and returned his smile. When Issei asked what she had wanted to ask, Irina said not to worry because she already had the answer she wanted. Later, when Irina's household belongings had been loaded onto the transport trucks and Issei's mother was saying goodbye to Irina's parents, the two children stood a little apart from the adults. Irina, embarrassed, said it was time for her to go. Issei smiled and reminded her that they had promised to see each other again. Irina teased him not to be like protagonists who forget their promises. Issei denied he would ever forget. Irina then told him she wanted to give him something and asked him to close his eyes. Issei obeyed and felt a necklace being placed around his neck. When he opened his eyes, Irina held a small black, elongated box decorated with golden motifs. She explained that the amulet inside had been given to her by her mother long ago and that she wanted it to protect him until they reunited. Her eyes were watery. Issei vowed with conviction to protect the amulet with his life. Irina smiled radiantly and called him her hero before running toward the car that would take them to the airport. Irina's smile became a memory Issei would carry until their reunion. High School Dix, Angelic Dragon Red Emperor. Elsewhere in the city, Mr. Hyoudou was leaving work and had gone to the office listed in a newspaper advertisement. The building stood near the outskirts of town. He entered a large reception hall and saw a young woman seated behind a wooden desk near the center. Mr. Hyoudou presented the notice from his briefcase and identified himself as a respondent to the advertisement. The receptionist, Ruko, told him he was the first to arrive and directed him to a small office, explaining that the manager and the board would meet with him shortly to discuss the proposal. Mr. Hyoudou sat on a bench in the waiting area and thought about how he hoped the proposal would be good so he could pay the mortgage and dedicate more time to his family. He reflected on how little he had shared with his son and his wife since her PRGNY, always working and missing parts of his son's childhood. He told himself not to worry and that he would fix things for Issei. His thoughts were interrupted by a voice behind him. He turned to see a pale, blonde man of foreign appearance, dressed in a cream suit from shoes to jacket with a lead-colored collar, a deep crimson shirt beneath, and a gray tie with dark red accents. The man spoke in a low, bored tone and introduced himself as Sarega with a crooked, unsettling smile. He mentioned that they had posted the ad weeks ago and that the day was unusually quiet. A younger man in a dark suit, appearing jovial and in his mid-20s, joined them and remarked that they did not need Mr. Hyoudou but that he would make a useful lure to persuade his wife. He looked to Ruko and called her Ruko-chan, describing their plan as using smaller bait to catch bigger fish. Ruko, identified as the secretary, urged them to be swift because someone who used a sacred sword had gone out that day, meaning they needed to act quickly to achieve their objective. Mr. Hyoudou rose abruptly and demanded to know what they planned to do to his family. The mood in the room shifted as the conspirators prepared to move on their scheme. Sarega remarked that they had almost forgotten as he delivered a heavy blow to Mr. Hyoudou's stomach. The impact sent him flying into the door, which splintered, leaving him sprawled on the floor. Sarega moved closer and, seeing that the man was unconscious, sneered that he was nothing but trash before hoisting him onto his shoulders. High School Dext, Angelical Dragon Red Emperor. Meanwhile at the Hyoudou residence, both mother and son had returned home. Issei's mother was calmly cooking while Issei looked at some drawings in the living room. The doorbell rang. After lowering the stove flame, his mother went to answer, wondering who could be calling at that hour. When she opened the door, two men in dark suits stood on the threshold, one taller than the other. The woman greeted them politely and asked what they wanted. The shorter man introduced himself as Robert Huppet and indicated his companion, Joseph Bombet. Robert's lined face suggested he was in his 40s or older, and he wore a completely black business suit. The woman asked again what they desired, a hint of apprehension in her voice. Joseph, who was taller and younger than his companion, spoke with a sarcastic, commanding tone and demanded to know where the key was. The woman protested that she did not understand what he meant. Robert then drew a sword and placed it close to her neck, forcing her into silence. Joseph stayed calm and pressed the point, trying to make her remember the key. The woman begged and insisted she did not know anything, pleading that they could take what they wanted but not hurt them. Joseph commented on her stubbornness and suggested they might need to be more forceful. A red circle of light appeared beneath the three of them. Joseph said the house was nice but could cause unnecessary interruptions, and that they would take her to the church on the hill where he intended to extract information from her. He spoke of enjoying the sound of her cries, making it clear that he intended to break her resistance. The noise drew Issei into the hallway. When he saw his mother in danger, he recklessly tried to help, only to watch helplessly as his mother vanished into particles along with the two men. Issei cried out for his mother and remembered Joseph's mention of the church on the hill. Issei knew that church. For several Sundays the parents of Irina had attended Mass there. The priest had been away on a pilgrimage, and the normal path to the church would take too long, but thanks to Irina, Issei knew a secret route that led there more directly. He locked the house, grabbed his bicycle, and took the shortcut, thinking that the red hero would save his mother. At the church, Joseph remarked that it would be a shame to harm the boy and implied a threat about cutting his throat if the mother did not cooperate. The woman begged and pleaded, crying that she did not know anything about any key and asking them to spare her son. Joseph insisted that he wanted the key to open the princess's sanctuary, claiming that by tradition each female descendant knew how to open it. The woman again protested that she had no knowledge of any key. Robert warned that denying them was useless, stating that they were not newcomers and that they had watched the family for 3 generations. He said he had seen the woman when her mother had taken her to the mountain sanctuary and insisted they only needed the key to enter. To make his point, he activated the altar by snapping his fingers, and a few dim candles lit to reveal Mr. Hyoudou chained to a wooden frame at the altar. The woman cried out in despair. Joseph reassured her in a cold tone that they had not yet harmed him but that could change depending on her stubbornness. He suggested it would be more entertaining if her son joined them, remarking that family reunions could be amusing. The woman was silenced when a blow to the back of her neck knocked her unconscious. The child arrived at the church, slamming his bicycle into a stand and rushing to the door. Inside, the only light came from the doorway he had opened. A young man in a dark suit, not one of those who had taken his mother, greeted him with a mocking welcome and applause. As that voice sounded, the church filled with rows of candles, casting the place in an eerie glow. The scene at the altar horrified the boy. Issei saw his mother bound at the altar with ropes and a crimson being FLD, and his father chained to a wooden frame above it. He ran toward them and cried out for his parents, but a hard kick to his stomach sent him back where he had started. He coughed and struggled to stand, telling them to release his parents because they had done nothing to deserve this and calling the man cruel. The young man laughed and, mimicking a childish tone, claimed he was a demon. Issei remembered stories Irina's father had told about demons and angels. He had never believed they were real, but he knew that demons should not be present in a church. The young man mocked him for being clever and the scene held a tense, unnerving energy as the kidnappers prepared to press their demand for the key. Sarega explained that they could not remain in a church but had arranged outside help to use the place as a temporary base as he poured water from a nearby vase onto Issei's mother to wake her and then roughly removed the blndfld from her eyes. The small Issei declared that he would save his parents and punish the men in the name of justice. Sarega taunted that Issei could save his parents if he begged his mother to reveal the location of the key they wanted. Only then, he said, would he release the family and let them leave safely. He admitted they might lie and then warned coldly that if they did not get what they wanted, Issei would suffer greatly, speaking in a tone that made the threat feel even darker. Using all her remaining strength, Issei's mother begged her son to run, to forget them, and to escape. Issei, fierce and determined, vowed he would not allow them to take his mother. Laughter echoed through the church, and Issei realized they were not alone. Sarega mocked the family, pointing out the boy's bravery and sarcastically calling him a hero. Issei insisted he would defeat them in the name of justice. Sarega acknowledged his courage and noted that other children would not have even noticed their mother's disappearance for hours, but that difference would not save. Sarega ordered Rivesen to deal with the boy, adding that he was eager to make an example of them. Rivesen, amused but impatient with the boy's lack of cooperation, said it was time to test whether Issei truly had the power to protect anything. In a blur of motion, Rivesen closed the distance and struck Issei in the stomach with a hard blow that lifted the boy off his feet. Midair, Rivesen grabbed Issei by the hair and held him face to face. As Issei's mother cried out in despair, Rivesen looked at the boy's defiant expression and lectured him about the difference in strength. Only power could protect what mattered. The weak became prey to the strong, and if Issei wanted someone to blame for failure, he should blame his own weakness and his mother's stubbornness. Rivesen then released the boy and delivered a spinning kick that sent him flying out of the church. The child missed the outer wall and instead tumbled across the path and down the slope, fortunate to be alive. Inside the church, only the thunder of Issei's mother's cries remained as she demanded her child back. Sarega said he had grown tired of her sobbing and intended to make her understand the difference between them. His expression turned wild and cruel as he approached, promising to use ugly magic to keep her alive while she suffered prolonged torment, ensuring she would die in agony and regret and curse the stubborn promise that had led them here. On the hillside, Issei's body could barely move. He breathed with difficulty, each inhalation slower than the last. His thoughts came in ragged fragments. He remembered believing that justice could conquer anything, just as in the cartoons he and Irina used to watch. Darkness had closed over his vision. He wondered if he had been foolish to hold that belief, that he was only a child who had been wrong. Coming here had not fixed anything. He felt too weak. He no longer tasted the metallic tang in his mouth, no longer smelled the dew of the surrounding woods, no longer heard the rustle of leaves or the wind. Still, the idea that justice by itself could protect nothing nagged at him. Human beings protect their loved ones, and for that they needed strength. Maybe it required more than strength. An absolute power to enforce justice so others would not suffer, so the weak and innocent could be defended. He wanted that power to protect, to stop feeling this despair, to keep from losing his family. As his senses dimmed and his body urged him toward surrender, a whisper of temptation brushed his mind, urging him to give up and sleep. He resisted. He had made promises to reunite with his friend and to save his parents, and those promises burned brighter than the darkness closing in. A presence answered him from within, noting that despite the spiritual barrier, Issei's feelings had reached it like a sun in the dark. The presence observed that his heart was pure and then asked how far he was willing to go to obtain the power he desired. Urged him to respond quickly, saying he did not have much time. Issei, or what remained of him, was startled by the voice and asked who it was. Issei wondered cautiously in his mind why the being offered him power. The voice answered inside his head that it had no malicious intent and that it was far from a demon. Issei pledged with conviction that if the power could save his parents and help others, he would give everything. The voice admitted it barely had the power to heal his wounds. Issei protested that such a small gift would not be enough to protect anyone. The voice explained that while it possessed an exceptional power, his body could not withstand it for long. It could, however, connect him to another power if his soul was modified to access it. The voice offered to heal his body now, warning that the pain to come would be unimaginable and might make him wish he were dead. Issei accepted, saying that he would endure any agony to save his parents and protect his loved ones. The voice then stated that in return Issei would become its bearer and servant. Issei agreed without hesitation. The voice instructed him to repeat the words it would tell him when the time came. Warmth flooded Issei's soul, intense as fire, as if he were being pulled and reshaped. The pain was fierce, but he gradually regained his senses. First he felt touch, and with it a sharp ache, then hearing returned, like the distant roar of an engine, then smell, which allowed him to draw a breath, then taste, which registered his distress, and finally sight, which revealed a dark stain beneath him. After a few moments the pain eased enough for the child to stand with difficulty. A cave lay before him, and two bright crystals emerged from it, one silver and one sky blue. Before he could react, the orb struck him and sank into his body. He gasped, pressing his hand to his chest in disbelief. The voice explained that it had healed and altered his shattered body enough for him to use the promised power and that there was no turning back. His body would change slowly from that moment on. He would no longer be merely human. With little energy left, the voice warned that they had only one chance to connect and that any mistake or interruption would doom the attempt. Issei thanked the voice and steadied himself to obey. Alone among the trees with the cave behind him and the dark stain at his feet, Issei prepared to recite the verses the voice demanded. He knew he had no other chance. He began to speak, his words carrying on the night air as he invoked the ritual. He called for silver and steel to be the essence. He named rock and the Archduke of Contracts as the foundation. He called for a wall to rise against the wind that must fall. He ordered the doors of the 4 cardinal points to close. From the throne he commanded a path to emerge and to follow the forked road that leads to the kingdom. He repeated the word provide 5 times and instructed that the sequence be repeated 5 times, destroying each part when it became whole. As he spoke, the dark stain separated and swirled into a circle engraved with inscriptions he did not understand but did not need to. When he reached the 4th verse, he closed his eyes to concentrate. His right hand felt as if heated by an iron, but he would not stop. He remembered the warning that any hesitation would shatter his hopes. A fierce wind rose from the circle, growing more turbulent with every verse. The circle itself began to glow with a polished silver light. Issei intoned that his words should be heard, that his will would create a body and that the sword would shape his destiny. He compelled Esbjemsen to the call of the Holy Grail and demanded that if his will and truth were obeyed, whatever answered should respond. Heat like molten current ran through his veins, searing and relentless, but he endured and continued reciting. He swore an oath to be all that was good in the eternal world and to defeat all that was evil there. He extended his arm as if to steady what threatened to overflow, gripping it with his other hand before delivering the final invocation. From the 7th heaven, protected by the Great Trinity, he commanded the guardian of the celestial balance to leave the circle of restraint. Thunder and lightning answered, and clouds whipped across the sky on a powerful gust that made it hard to see. The patterns of the summoning circle flared with radiant light. In the moonlit forest, a majestic voice asked whether he was the master. Exhausted, Issei fell back onto the ground, breathing heavily. When he looked up he saw a young woman standing in the center of the circle. She appeared no more than 16, with pale skin and red eyes and long black hair falling below her knees, some bangs casually across her forehead. Her outfit was simple and functional. A dark vest over a white collared shirt, a loosely tied red necktie with a small golden clip, a dark skirt, black stockings and shoes, and a long black coat with armored forearms. In her left hand she held a katana with red fittings. The woman announced that his servant, assassin, had come in response to his call. The girl bowed to the boy with intense red eyes and said that from now on her sword would stand at his side and his destiny would be hers. Issei gave a brief reply. The being who had emerged from the summoning circle amid lightning and smoke was an ordinary human. This was not what he had expected, and he wondered what kind of power she possessed. The fact that she carried a katana suggested she was a swordswoman, and she might have the strength to help him rescue his parents. The girl identified herself as having manifested under the assassin class and asked his name. Issei recovered from his surprise and introduced himself as Hyoudou Issei. The girl closed her eyes and stated that their pact was sealed. Issei asked who she was. The girl explained that she was his assassin class servant and instructed him to call her assassin. She observed that he was not an ideal master, but declared that he would be her master all the same. Issei felt a sting in his right hand and saw a tattoo of 3 converging symbols appear. The dominant mark resembled a spiral with a straight deviation at its start or end, while the other 2 were simple convergent lines wrapping the right side of the spiral. He had felt pain during the summoning and now realized it was a command seal. Assassin explained that these were command seals and warned him not to waste them, then asked what his orders were. Remembering his purpose, Issei began to ask for help. Meanwhile, at the church where Issei's mother was being held, the demons sensed a surge of magical energy from the woods in front of the building. The woman among them went to the door to investigate. From up the hill they watched in disbelief as the boy whom Rifson had sent flying like a rag doll walked back toward the church with no visible wounds apart from dried blood on his clothing. He looked determined and entered the church without hesitation, passing by the woman as if ignoring her. She narrowed her eyes in fury. Issei demanded that his parents be released immediately, warning of consequences. Ruko reacted with outrage and transformed her hand into a blade-like weapon aimed at his neck. Her strike came with terrifying speed, but it did not hit its mark. In an instant, Assassin had appeared and swiftly incapacitated Ruko with a precise, non-graphic strike that left Ruko collapsed on the floor. From the crowd's perspective, it seemed as if some exorcist or other intervener had healed Issei and dispatched Ruko. No one could tell where the attack had come from. Ruko had been a low-level demon with exceptional speed, and the suddenness of her defeat shocked everyone. There was no time for words. Sarega launched an immediate attack on the boy, but the black-haired assassin intercepted and blocked every blow. After the first barrage, Assassin and Sarega sized each other up. Issei, serious and resolute, told Assassin that he could not assist directly and asked her to show her power there and then. Assassin glanced briefly at Issei, focused on the demon, gripped the katana, and the duel began. In less than a second, Assassin vanished from the demon's sight, and Sarega sharpened his senses, drawing a small dagger to prepare for the assault. Blows came in rapid succession, tearing through the surroundings as the two clashed. The dagger could not withstand the katana's force. As Sarega discarded the dagger and lashed out with elongated nails aimed at Assassin's face, Assassin used a circular katana motion to break the strike, buying herself a moment. Sarega generated a crimson energy and hurled it at her, but Assassin cleaved the energy in 2 with an upward sweep of her blade. Closing the distance, she brought her sword down toward the demon, forcing him back. Sarega managed to pull away, suffering a light scratch on his front. Sarega acknowledged Assassin's skill, declaring that he did not know which organization she belonged to but that she would die. He tore at his clothing as a red aura swelled around him and his muscles bulged unnaturally, preparing for a renewed onslaught. Assassin turned her back on Sarega and declared that the fight was over and that he should not waste his energy, then shifted her attention to the next threat. Sarega reacted with disbelief. Sarega exploded in anger, accusing the girl of claiming the battle was already over. The girl only pointed to the arm that had been scratched. When Sarega looked at it, he widened his eyes in shock as black marks spread from the wound toward his chest at an unnaturally steady pace. Sarega wondered what kind of sorcery this was. Assassin explained calmly that it was not sorcery but the ability of her katana. As long as a heart still beat, whether human or demon, her blade could strike true. The black marks reached Sarega's chest and, after a brief struggle, he collapsed, motionless on the floor. The other demons grew anxious, except for the calm and analytical Rifson. Using his enhanced vision, he examined the stigma marked on the boy's right hand, then closed his eyes and smiled in understanding. Joseph demanded to know what was happening. Rifson answered that, unlikely as it seemed, the boy had invoked a servant. He had heard rumors of a ritual performed every 60 or 70 years in this land and now confirmed it was true. Rivesen told his companions that they had no chance against that power and that he would handle the servant while the others dealt with the boy, which he insisted was the quickest way to end the threat. The girl urged Issei, the boy she acknowledged as master, to find safety. Issei refused, saying there was nowhere safe in the ruined church and that he trusted her to secure victory. Rivesen scoffed at them. He reminded them that Ruko and Sarega had been mere low and mid-level demons compared to him. Then he revealed his heritage, declaring himself far above an ordinary demon. He was a descendant of the original Maos and named himself Rivesen Belphegor. Power surged from him, filling the church and shaking the stone underfoot. The force of his demonic aura cracked the floor and pulverized nearby pews. Rivesen taunted the servant, noting that assassin-class servants were considered the weakest among servants and questioning what she expected to accomplish. As he spoke, his clothes were consumed in violet flame, revealing black armor trimmed in gold and two enormous blades attached to his forearms that shimmered like crystal. Assassin replied that she did not need to prove her strength and that reading a servant's statistics did not guarantee the ability to predict their movements. She prepared to follow her master's orders and secure victory. Her current mission was to eliminate Rivesen. The combat began. In a flurry of motion, they exchanged 5 rapid strikes. Assassin gained the advantage, delivering a powerful kick that sent Rivesen flying into the side of the church, slamming him against a column. Rivesen barely avoided a piercing move from the katana by using debris as a shield. A descending cut from the servant obliterated the column, scattering stone and dust across the nave. Rivesen acknowledged inwardly that, servant or not, a heroic spirit's experience and mastery in combat were impressive. He marveled at Assassin's speed and the strength behind her blows. He countered with skill, blocking and opening a brief gap between them. Assassin closed the distance with a heavy downward strike, driving her weight through the cut to break Rivesen's guard. He crossed his blades to resist, and the two forces locked in a violent exchange. Rivesen managed to repel the attack, sending Assassin's blade upward and leaving his own arms extended above him, exposing his midsection. As Assassin prepared to finish the move, Rivesen smiled and produced 2 magical circles along the backs of his forearms. They gathered power and fired at her head and chest. Inhumanly quick, Assassin deflected the shot aimed at her head perfectly. The second blast struck near her torso and shoved her across the floor. She slid several meters and rose almost immediately, touched only by a tiny wound on her left thigh that vanished in a small celestial glow. Rivesen had expected serious damage at that distance and brooded at the ease with which she had withstood the attack. He convinced himself that she must be a celebrated hero to possess such defenses, and then declared that he had already completed his objective. A sudden surge of demonic energy swept toward Issei. Rivesen had been careful all along. He had not needed to sustain the full strength of his aura to manifest his armor, but he had saturated the environment with his power so his allies could strike at range without being noticed. A powerful explosion reverberated through the church. Assassin cried out for her master and strained to discern the outcome. Rivesen seized the moment to strike from behind, but Assassin met the attack with her own blade. The clang of steel rang out as she countered. Rivesen could only cross his blades to block. Surprised but composed, he let a derisive smile cross his face and declared that the servant's fight was finished. One of the demons asserted that even a being as powerful as his rival could not survive without a master and that, without the boy, he would only have to wait until the opponent vanished. Issei replied through the smoke that he would not be so sure. When the smoke cleared, the boy stood unharmed and a sword floated before him. That object had blocked the demonic power. The sword was massive, taller than the boy himself. Its broad blade contained 2 lines of light that seemed to emerge from a bright core. Inside Issei's mind, a conversation unfolded. The voice inside the boy admitted that it had barely managed to summon the sword in time. Issei asked with curiosity whether that voice had called the blade, since he had not heard it since the initial summoning. The voice explained that it was indeed the sword's original source, a fragment of its power, but warned Issei to give up using it for now because he lacked the experience and strength to wield it properly. It told him that he still had far to go before he could become its bearer. Issei acknowledged the warning and said he could finally feel the power coursing through him. He admitted that he had been confused when the voice had said his body had changed, but now he felt a connection to the sword, as if the voice were the silver orb he sensed inside him. He touched his chest to confirm the feeling. The voice promised to introduce itself properly when everything was over and urged him not to overexert himself. Issei agreed and told the voice not to worry. He had many things to do and would not push himself recklessly. Outside, Joseph reacted in confusion, noting that the sword before the boy was a holy blade and wondering how such a thing could be summoned. His companion called the situation increasingly absurd. The boy had appeared ordinary when he arrived, but now not only could he perform a summoning ritual like a servant, he could also bring forth a holy sword for his protection. Both demons grew enraged when Issei proclaimed that justice would prevail and demanded their surrender. The demons cursed the boy and accelerated their demonic power, rushing forward to attack. The voice inside Issei's head warned him that his provocation was dangerous, that the sword could not protect him from attacks coming from multiple directions, and urged him to run. Issei replied that he was not worried. He had begun to sense the source of the power within him. He described how his body felt crossed by lines of energy and how a silver line ran from the orb to his left hand, connecting to the sword, while acknowledging that this was not the only orb inside him. The inner voice pleaded with desperation for Issei to stop, insisting he was not ready for such power. Issei replied that he would risk everything to save his parents even if he had to suffer, because he preferred that to watching them hurt. One of the demons shouted at him in fury. Issei sank deeper into his inner world and observed his body as if it were a mechanism threaded by energy. A great source fed those lines, and the silver orb was connected to it. He noticed another line connected to a blue orb that carried no energy. Using his will, he forced a slow but steady current of power along that unused line toward the blue orb. When the energy reached it, the blue orb filled and began to glow so brightly that it was almost blinding. Outside, a clear light flooded the church and a small miracle seemed to take place. High School DxD Angelical Dragon Red Emperor. The energy radiating from the church was felt across 3 distant regions, from the underworld to the skies. Underworld Demon Sector Capital Lilith. Seraphal Leviathan, her brown hair tied in twin tails, rose from the conference table where the current demon lords had gathered. She remarked that the energy signature resembled that of a seraphim-level angel and questioned what such a being would be doing in the human world. A young man with crimson hair noted that the signature did not match any known seraphim. Surzex requested that Graphia locate the exact position of this anomaly. Graphia, a silver-haired woman in a maid outfit, bowed and left to carry out the task. Seraphal expressed concern and insisted they investigate what was happening. Surzex agreed that a power like that appearing in the human world was alarming and urged them to act quickly, not wanting to imagine the consequences of an action that could lead to another war. Ajuka, another demon lord, pointed out that finding the precise location would be difficult after such a large reaction, and they might not be there by the time they arrived. Seraphal proposed stationing some high-class demons to monitor the area in case something developed later. Surzex considered assigning his sister Rias for experience if the area proved to be calm, noting it was early to make such a decision but that it could be beneficial. Seraphal found the idea appealing for Rias's growth. Underworld Fallen Angels Sector Grigori. A member of Grigori burst into the office of the Governor-General of the Fallen Angels and called out urgently for Azazel. Azazel stood looking out over his domain and acknowledged that he had not expected to feel that presence again, confirming the rumors. Another visitor asked what they should do. Azazel instructed Barakiel to investigate the source. Even though Barakiel had plans to see his wife and daughter, Azazel emphasized the importance of this matter because the energy's origin was curiously near the Himajima shrine where Barakiel's family was located. Barakiel agreed to the order and prepared to depart at once. Barakiel replied that he would investigate, then visit his wife and daughter, and bring the report the next day. He did not know the tragedy that would unfold from obeying that order. Kingdom of Heaven 6th Heaven Zebel. Meanwhile, in a vast hall of pure, pristine white, a handsome young man with blonde hair, green eyes, and 12 radiant golden wings opened his eyes in surprise when he sensed the angelic signature of a seraphim. It seemed impossible, he thought, but his senses did not lie. The signature belonged to one of the seraphims who had fought in the great war between the factions. The seraphim Gabriel, a blonde in a white tunic bearing 10 shining white wings, asked Michael if he felt the presence. Michael answered that he did and wondered how it could be after so much time. Gabriel suggested it might be a miracle of God. A third voice, Sariel, ash blonde in tone and appearance and not manifesting her wings, announced that she would investigate immediately. Michael smiled and gave his permission. Sariel hurried from the chamber and met 2 angels at the exit. Camel, a light brown-haired man with 6 wings, and Haniel, a red-haired woman who also did not manifest her wings. They told Sariel that they had felt the presence as well and would accompany her to the human world. Sariel urged haste, warning that while demons might not know the exact location, the fallen angels were another matter. 3 bright lights then descended from the heavens toward the human realm. High School DxD Angelical Dragon Red Emperor. In the church, the clash of swords continued as Assassin and Rivesen fought. After the sudden light that had flooded the building, the girl regained the advantage. She seemed stronger now, and her magical energy remained steady. Rivesen delivered a powerful blow to create distance from the servant and looked to assess the situation. What he saw astonished him. Large blocks of ice near the church entrance encased Joseph and Robert. No demonic energy radiated from them, as if they were lifeless. A child then proclaimed that this was the result, thanking him for the lesson that only those with power could act, and stating that now he knew he could truly protect everyone. Rivesen searched for the child and spotted a white feather near his face. Looking up, he saw the child suspended in the air with 2 white wings shining like daylight. That was the remaining power they had sought, the power of one of the seraphims who had fought in the Great War, the seraphim Zadkiel. Rivesen's surprise twisted into grim delight as he realized he no longer needed any key. The power had been brought to him, and he no longer needed to hold back. Assassin voiced surprise that he had looked away during a fight and then struck with a horizontal cut that sent Rivesen tumbling across the church. He chastised himself for careless eagerness to claim his prize. Assassin declared the fight decided and intensified her assault, the sound of her blades grinding filling the air. Rivesen worried his weapons would break and had to focus on blocking attacks aimed at disarming him. In his desperation, he used his vision to evaluate his opponent and was shocked to discover she had risen to rank A. That momentary distraction proved costly. With a powerful upward motion, Assassin shattered both of his blades. Rivesen had no time to react. The girl issued the command to eliminate, then delivered a decisive, non-graphic strike that incapacitated him. Rivesen let out a choked sound as a dark energy spread through him. He staggered and then collapsed, silence closing in as the confrontation reached its definitive end. He refused to die there. A mad smile formed on his lips, and with his last strength he shaped a sphere of demonic energy in his right hand and sent it toward Issei's defenseless mother. An explosion rocked the church. A lance of light intercepted the demonic blast and dissolved it, and then another lance of light pierced Rivesen. A golden circle unfurled from its core, enveloping him, and angelic energy washed over his form until he disintegrated into motes of light and dust. With the threat gone, Issei's wings fell away and he slipped toward unconsciousness in the arms of his servant, while 3 figures descended with white wings and halos, white feathers drifting through the church. Then Issei's mind and body sank into darkness. For Sariel, the scene was intense. From above, he had sensed not only Zadkiel's presence but also one he remembered as a close ally from the Great War, the seraphim Sandalphon. From his vantage point he could see the ruin inside the church, 2 demons trapped in blocks of ice near the doors, and on the right side of the nave a brutal struggle between 2 non-human opponents. The man was a high-ranking demon, and the woman, though she had a human-shaped body, was a spiritual construct of pure prana. What drew Sariel most was the human child with angel wings and Zadkiel's angelic signature. As the angels descended, they watched the demon fall, but the demon made one last treacherous strike toward a woman bound at the altar. Sariel and Haniel unleashed lances of light that blocked the attack and neutralized the demon. The child then lost consciousness, his wings folding. The woman lifted him and cradled him in her arms. When they landed, Sariel ordered his subordinates to free the bound man and woman and moved to the spiritual being to seek answers. At that moment he felt it. Across the city a stifling demonic power was surging toward the church. His companions felt it too. The power was still some distance away but would arrive in minutes, and Sariel knew at a glance that even he could not face it alone. It would take at least 5 seraphim to stand against whatever was coming. He made a quick decision and instructed Haniel and Camel to prepare a transport circle. The red-haired woman remained stunned by the demonic force, and Camel hastened to activate the circle. Camel asked urgently where to direct it. Sariel replied that they would go to the Vatican in Rome, reasoning that there they could better defend themselves and inform Michael. Sariel readied spears of light in case the circle was not completed in time. After a few tense minutes, Camel finished the transport circle. Haniel had already rescued the 2 humans, and the spiritual entity remained close to the circle. Once everyone stood within the golden ring, Sariel cast a last look toward the approaching darkness and activated the circle, disappearing in a scattering of light. That would be the last time the Hyoudou family would be seen in their hometown for the next 9 years. High School Dext, Angelical Dragon Red Emperor. After the angels departed, soft footsteps echoed through the church. The moon barely lit the interior with a faint glow. A lone figure studied the frozen demons and walked toward the traces left by Rivesen Belphegor. Crouched by the ashes and laughed softly, commenting that, as expected of a seraphim, nothing remained of Rivesen. She then told him he had been mistaken. If killing a demon lord were so simple, the war would never have escalated. The shadowy woman extended her hand. A gentle wind stirred the ashes and small beams of light coalesced in her palm into an aquamarine crystal. She regarded the crystal and said she had placed many hopes in Rivesen. He had been less proud than other demon lord descendants and that she had wished he would deliver the orbs of the ancient seraphim to her, but he had been defeated by a child, which she found amusing. The core of the ancient Mao Belphegor could still serve him, he thought as he rose. With the cores of Mammon, Satan, and now Belphegor, his efforts had not been in vain. Heavy steps sounded outside the ruined church. The fallen angel Barakiel entered and took in the devastation, signs of a recent battle evident everywhere. In one shadowed corner a small figure stood, emanating a dense demonic aura like that of the Mao, though it did not match anyone he knew. Barakiel readied himself for a fight and demanded to know who had caused the chaos. A piece of the ceiling broke away where a beam of light had struck and the moonlight revealed the intruder. A young woman stood there, her very pale lilac hair and violet eyes catching the moon. Her presence was uncanny but otherwise unremarkable. The woman smiled and told Barakiel that she could ask him the same question, that it was a pity he did not recognize her, and that they had not crossed swords in the Great War. She suggested, with playful menace, that he pretend not to have seen her. Barakiel refused, insisting that he had to know what had happened in the church. The woman answered with mock sorrow that, had he recognized her, he might have been able to protect his family. She added that danger had been mounting lately and hinted that his family might be at risk, which enraged Barakiel and made him demand her plans. The woman maintained that she bore no direct responsibility, but claimed she had heard rumors that some priests were displeased with his wife and might act against her that day. Confused and alarmed, Barakiel did not notice how quickly she closed the distance between them. She leaned close and murmured something in his ear, then a subtle movement of her hand sent out a sudden burst of force that struck Barakiel. The blow flung him across the nave, through a wall, and into the church courtyard. The woman told Barakiel farewell, saying that a series of interesting events had just begun and that she intended only to watch. With a soft laugh she melted into the night. High School Dext, Angelical Dragon Red Emperor. Human World, Vatican, Rome, Italy. In a spare, quiet room, Issei lay on a firm bed while his servant kept watch. His father occupied another bed nearby. Both had been treated and their vital signs were stable. The nun who had tended them had said they only needed rest. Sariel had already heard the whole story. It turned out Issei's mother knew the location of the grotto but not the existence of any key to open the sanctuary. That detail had apparently been passed down to women of the family, and Issei had never been part of that circle. He could not have imagined how dangerous things would become. Hours later, Issei awoke on the firm mattress and sat up, relieved to see his parents sleeping. He noticed several keen observers in the room, his servant assassin and 3 angels who had descended before he lost consciousness. Issei felt confused and asked where he was. Sariel, a seraphim in the service of the Holy Father, explained that he was in Rome at the Vatican. Sariel identified the red-headed woman accompanying her as Haniel and the man standing in a corner as her assistant, Camel. Issei introduced himself as Hyoudou Issei. Sariel acknowledged him and said they knew of his courage in protecting his loved ones, and that they also knew about the 2 strange orbs within him and the trouble he had caused by summoning the girl, indicating assassin. A voice in Issei's mind suggested that it speak with the seraphim directly, saying it would be faster that way. Issei questioned how that would be possible, since no one could hear the voice. The voice reminded him that he had said he could feel its power inside him. Issei agreed and channeled his power toward the silver orb, leaving the rest to the voice. As he did, the sacred sword that had saved him in the church materialized. Sariel and her companions showed visible surprise. Then the sword itself spoke, its tone light and amused as it called out greetings from a distance. Sariel's eyes filled with tears at the voice, and she asked if it was truly Sandalphon. The sword identified itself as Sandalphon, the 6th seraphim in service to God and the twin brother of Metatron, explaining that it could communicate now thanks to the materialization of its blade, Halvan Helaf, the final sword. Sariel smiled through her tears and wiped them away. A short bridge of quiet followed as everyone in the room absorbed the sudden turn of events. Sandalphon asked in a more serious voice how they had learned of his awakening. Sariel explained that they had not detected Sandalphon's awakening directly. They had detected the angelic signature of Zadkiel and wondered if he had awakened as well. Sandalphon replied that he feared not. If Zadkiel had awakened, it had been abrupt and instantaneous, only to help Issei confront those demons. Sariel sighed and said she understood. Camel knelt on one knee in a formal salute and expressed that it was an honor to have Sandalphon among them. He then admitted a doubt and asked whether Sandalphon had been the one to help the boy summon that servant. Sandalphon confirmed that he had, though he had not expected Sariel to know the servant's name. Sariel looked puzzled and turned to Camel for an explanation. Camel explained that, as director of magical research for Sariel, it was his duty to understand the types of magic in the human world. He added that he knew more about the subject because he relied on that knowledge to develop the Angelic Incarnation Project for Sariel. Sariel agreed but asked Sandalphon how he knew this. Sandalphon answered that it was not the first time a human had come to the grotto. Less than 60 years earlier, a mage had come to the shrine, attempted to enter and failed, yet had drawn a strange symbol that resembled a summoning circle. When he called his servant, he named the class rider. The mage established a base in the city, came and went for 2 weeks, and through their conversations Sandalphon had learned everything about the Holy Grail War. Camel then questioned whether that included the fact that Sandalphon had involved that child in a life-or-death war. For a moment, silence was the only sound. Sandalphon laughed softly that he must have missed that part, and then the place erupted into an uproar. Complaints and whines rose until Sariel had to calm everyone. Sariel said that it no longer mattered and that they should focus on how to remove the boy from the contest, asking Camel for ideas. Camel answered that it was impossible and questioned how the boy had been able to summon assassin of all the servants. Haniel asked why that would be a problem. Camel explained that the Holy Grail War was a conflict between mages to obtain a wish, created by 3 great families of Magi Einsburn, Tosaka and Makiri. He said it had originally been a mechanism to access Akasha, the source where the Akashic records were kept, but because the families could not reach that goal on their own, they devised the servant system. 7 heroic spirits are summoned into classes: Saber, Archer, Lancer, Rider, Caster, Berserker and Assassin, each with strengths and weaknesses. Masters fight in a last man standing contest and will kill anyone who stands in the way of their wish. Due to various circumstances, the ritual had never been completed properly. With the boy in his current position, Camel said, It was like putting a lamb in a lion's den, especially since he had summoned assassin. Hanyul said she still did not understand. Camel reiterated that because it was everyone against everyone, statistically only saber, archer and lancer tend to reach the end of the war. Among the servants, assassin was the weakest, but his greater concern was that the boy appeared pure. Summoning without a catalyst meant the heroic spirit most compatible with the master would be chosen. Under those conditions, the boy should have summoned saber or at least rider. Serial admitted that he had thought the same and that he had told the boy to perform the summoning, but the boy had in fact had a catalyst, a small box his friend had given him that same day. Camel sighed and said they could not cry over spilt milk. Once the boy was inside the war, there was no simple way to remove him, so they had to prepare him as best they could. Serial pointed out that he could not be absent from heaven for long and that Issei could not go because he was human. Sandalphon said the boy needed to be introduced to the magical arts so he could learn to control part of Tzadkiel's power. Camel proposed contacting mercenaries who had left the clock tower and sometimes helped with investigations. They could teach the boy the basics of magic. Sandalphon agreed that it was a good idea but warned that it would be useless if the boy's body could not withstand the training. Hanyul offered that she had contacts in the Holy Church who could train him physically and mentally and obtain good results. Camel asked how certain she was. Hanyul answered with confidence that it was completely safe and that she even had references from a promising group that had graduated at 10 as executors. Several were scattered around the world, but one of their fathers happened to be in Italy. She could contact him so he could reach his son, who was the best among them. Serial asked what the executor's name was. Hanyul began to say that he was called Issei, who had felt a little ignored, slipped away with assassin through a door near his parents' bed and found himself on a balcony that overlooked the beauty of Rome in full splendor. Issei thought the view was beautiful and looked over the colorful city dotted with churches and cathedrals and various tourist sites. Assassin observed the city and then turned to him, calling him strange because he seemed so calm, almost as if he were not afraid. Issei wondered if he appeared that way and explained that everything had happened so suddenly he had not had time to be surprised. That morning he had been saying goodbye to a friend and playing like a normal child. Now he had entered a world of demons, angels, servants and people willing to kill in a war. He admitted that if he allowed himself to be surprised for a single moment, he feared he would not be able to handle it. Assassin studied the expression of her master and then told him there was a way out, noting that he probably did not know how valuable command seals were. She explained that command seals forced a servant to carry out an order. For example, she could not normally teleport far from there, but if he used one of the seals to order her, the act could be performed by drawing on the magical energy of both master and servant. Issei asked if that was why there were so few seals, given their great power, and asked what she meant. Assassin said that he could use a command seal to order her to end her own life, which would make her the first servant to leave the contest and cause him to lose the remaining seals, effectively removing him from the war. Issei refused firmly, insisting that he was not a coward and that he would not abandon her after what she had done. Issei spoke with conviction that he would fight with her until the end and never abandon her. Assassin sat on a nearby chair and, speaking seriously, explained that fighting for the Holy Grail meant fighting for a wish the omnipotent object could grant. Unless she knew his wish, she could not entrust him with her sword, and she asked what his wish was. Issei closed his eyes, looked over the city, and remembered the night's events. He said his wish was to protect all people so no one else would have to go through what he had endured. He explained that he was still young but wanted to do it with his own hands rather than ask the omnipotent object for help. For that reason he claimed no wish to declare if he won. His true goal was to defeat the other masters because anyone willing to kill could have unpredictable desires. Assassin regarded him with a warm smile and, with unusual kindness in her eyes, said that he wanted to be a champion of justice and that she could not have asked for a better master. She rose from the chair, approached him, stood a few meters away with a straight, firm posture, and apologized for having once judged him inadequate because of his age. She bowed slightly and offered her strength to him, declaring there was no one else she would rather serve. Issei smiled, thanked her, and said they should sleep and begin training in the morning. Assassin returned the agreement with a soft smile. Issei then told her she did not always need to call him master and gave his name as Hyoudou Issei. Assassin said she would call him Issei and observed that the name suited him, reflecting the kind of vows he made for a lifetime. They entered the room together. Unknown to them, angels had overheard the conversation and approved of his good heart. High School DxD Angelical Dragon Red Emperor. 3 days later, Turin, Italy. Issei stayed with his servant in a large house in a residential area of Turin. The angels had departed the day after their arrival in Rome. His parents had been placed in a protection program and would be assisted in finding new jobs once they learned Italian. Meanwhile, Issei had been brought to the house to meet his instructor. A door opened and a man of about 30 entered, wearing clerical robes with a gold cross at his chest. His build was clearly reinforced, with brown hair and distinct Japanese features. He announced that he would be Issei's instructor for the next 3 years and introduced himself as Kodomine Kyrie. Underworld Fallen Angels Sector Grigori. In a medical facility, a middle-aged man walked down a corridor past empty beds toward the object of his search. The mission had apparently gone wrong, and he wanted an account from his subordinate. Barakil, the Grigori director who had sent an investigation into the unusual appearance of the Seraph Zadkiel in the human world, lay on a bed. When the visitor reached Barakil's side, he found someone he had not expected. Azazel addressed Kokabil with surprise at seeing him outside his quarters and visiting a recovering comrade. Kokabil said he had come as soon as he heard Barakil had awakened and commented on Barakil's toughness. Azazel asked how Barakil was and noted that his arrival in a severely wounded state had frightened everyone. His injuries must have left him unconscious for at least a week, yet he had recovered in a matter of hours. Barakil admitted he had been better but explained that the young woman they had encountered had been extraordinarily powerful, and even a brief contact had left him incapacitated. The fallen angels exchanged looks, and Azazel asked if Barakil remembered any details about the woman, her hair, face, eyes, or any distinguishing feature. Barakil said he would never forget her, purple hair, those eyes, and an expression that shifted between smiling and mocking. Kokabil's face twisted in fear at that description. Barakil noticed Kokabil's reaction and asked if he knew her. Kokabil confirmed that they did, and Azazel questioned what she wanted and whether she had said anything. Barakil replied that he did not know and asked what the problem was. Barakil admitted that she was strong, but he was certain that if all the leaders united they could defeat her, and he asked who she was. Kokabil asked incredulously what the problem was, then warned that the power Barakil had felt was not even a fraction of her true strength. He began to say that she was the one responsible but was interrupted. Azazel called for calm in a commanding tone, unusual for the typically lazy governor. He explained that they could not disclose her identity, but he could say that she was the reason he had decided to withdraw from the contest between the 3 factions. Barakil was astonished. The motives behind Azazel's withdrawal had never been discussed openly before, and he wondered if the woman Barakil had seen could really be so powerful as to unsettle both of the others. Kokabil, frustrated, admitted that he almost wished to join the angels and the demons just to see if they could defeat her together. Azazel laughed softly and noted that it was strange Kokabil mentioned that. He reported that, moments earlier, Michael and Surzex had contacted him. The power they had sensed had alarmed all the factions, and so they had requested the opening of negotiations for a peace agreement. The shock on the faces of the 2 fallen was palpable. A peace agreement was inconceivable. There had been a fragile truce since the end of the Great War, primarily because of the massive losses each side had suffered. The fallen angels had fewer losses thanks to Azazel's timely withdrawal. The angels of heaven had lost the God of the Bible and 2 of their seraphim, and the demons had lost the original 7 Maos. 3 of those Mao had been lost forever, leaving only 4 in operation. Kokabil, who had most hoped for a new war to annihilate the other factions, stared stunned. Azazel teased that Kokabil had wanted peace just moments ago and told him to own his words. Barakil asked what Azazel had answered. Azazel replied that he had said nothing yet and that the response would come tomorrow. Personally, Azazel would vote yes, but he wanted to know what the others thought, especially Kokabil. Kokabil's face twisted with anger and displeasure. He conceded that the matter could be attended to first and that his personal grievances could wait, his response almost a snarl. Azazel then asked Barakiel what had happened afterward. He reminded Barakiel that he had said he would visit his wife and daughter and asked what occurred. Barakiel fell into thought, remembering the previous night when he arrived at the Hyoudou sanctuary and found something he had never expected. He admitted that he had never thought they would go that far. Azazel pressed for details while Kuoh watched from a corner, frowning. Kuoh despised anything that was not his own kind and hated humans with an unusual intensity. He blamed humans for the fall of Azazel and others in Grigori, and now humans had caused suffering for another of their companions. Kuoh had not fallen through lust, unlike some. He had fallen through anger and a thirst for battle. As the war took more victims, he had tried to save his brothers but had failed. Consumed by rage and remorse, he fell from grace. His wings turned black and his visage bore the marks of countless battles and an unrelenting bloodlust. Lost in thought, none of them noticed soft but quick footsteps approaching the room until a young woman appeared in the doorway, breathless from running. She hurried to Barakiel's bedside and, relieved, told him that she had come as soon as Aquino had gone to sleep. Barakiel, embarrassed, acknowledged her presence. Azazel made a cynical remark in an attempt to lighten the mood. Barakiel reacted with a swift, non-lethal blow to Azazel's midsection that sent the governor stumbling to the floor. Barakiel insisted that Azazel show more respect to his wife. Azazel brushed it off as a joke. Azazel said that he could no longer stand it as he tried to sit up on his own and then collapsed awkwardly back down. Shuri Himejima observed with some astonishment the way they treated one another. They seemed like old friends, or more precisely like ordinary humans sharing the same emotions, joys, and sorrows. Azazel acknowledged that she was right and added that he had intended to speak with her, looking serious, because they knew very little about what had happened the previous night at her home. Shuri looked at the floor for a moment, trying to arrange her scattered memories. She explained that she was not very sure of the details. She had been with her daughter Aquino preparing for bed when she suddenly heard noises outside. When she went to see, priests of her clan stood before their home, armed with torches, and demanded that she hand over her husband and her daughter so they could be punished, promising that she would be allowed to return to the clan if she complied. But that description, Shuri's eyes filled with deep pain. Barakiel ground his teeth and clenched his hands so hard his knuckles whitened. Shuri said that she had not obeyed them and had tried to take Aquino to a safe place, but the priests forced their way in by breaking down the door. Because there were many of them, they managed to separate her from her daughter. When they were about to harm Aquino, Shuri had managed to free herself from her captors and shield her daughter with her own body, prepared to defend her at all costs. After that point, everything became confusing and her memory blurred, she told them, clutching her head as if it hurt to remember. Barakiel recounted that when he found them both, Shuri and Aquino were lying on the floor and he feared the worst. When he checked on the rest of the sanctuary, it had been wrecked and set ablaze. The priests lay where they had fallen, and the scene resembled the aftermath of a fierce, chaotic battle. It had been a massacre, he said. Azazel said that he understood the situation but that it would be very helpful if she could remember anything else. Shuri closed her eyes and strained to recall, then said that she remembered a head of hair, lilac with a silvery sheen, and a black outfit. She thought it must have been a woman, but she could not be certain because the figure had been turned away. She apologized and said that was all she could remember. Azazel and Kuoh exchanged looks. Azazel told Barakiel that the description matched the woman's seen at the church. Barakiel replied that it could be the same person but he could not be sure, since he had not seen her with his own eyes at Himejima Sanctuary. Still, he added, it seemed unlikely to be mere coincidence. Azazel said that he feared it was not a coincidence, but that her motivations remained inscrutable. Kuoh remarked with a touch of irritation that perhaps it had simply been a whim on her part. The governor then said that they needed to keep an eye on the city, since peace negotiations were about to begin. He would try to negotiate the temporary use of the church as a base, but they still needed to decide who could cover the watch posts in the area. Kuoh suggested sending Kalawarner and Donasik, saying they would be quick to detect any anomalies and alert them immediately. Azazel agreed and said he would leave the details for Kuoh to send. He added that he would talk a little longer with them as Kuoh left the room. Azazel thanked Shuri for her cooperation and asked what her plans were going forward. Shuri looked to the floor and then at her husband, who watched her with pleading eyes. She said that she wished to stay until the danger had passed. She confessed that the previous night she had not been able to protect their daughter from the clan priests or from that mysterious woman, and she begged the governor to allow her and her husband to remain. Azazel smiled and assured them that they could stay for as long as they needed. Barakiel, still on the bed, asked the governor if he was sure. Azazel confirmed without hesitation that they were welcome to stay. Azazel smiled and assured them there was no problem, offering the vast space in his barracks and even a generous territory where they could build a proper house and live with family for as long as they needed. Shuri thanked him with tears of happiness. Azazel then made a practical remark about needing assistance and mentioned the medical wing. Barakiel laughed and asked if the matter still followed him. Azazel noted that Rainier had proven very persistent and that it was understandable she would be lonely without someone to play with. He made that final comment before leaving the room, and the couple began making plans for the coming years. Realm of Heaven, Sixth Heaven, Zebul. After submitting her report, Sariel found herself turning over the events in her mind. She had learned from Michael about his intent to begin peace negotiations, a revelation that had unsettled her. Her own report had focused on the mysterious demonic energy felt in the city, which had been the catalyst for the three factions to open dialogue. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel all seemed to know the origin of that energy, but they chose not to reveal it given how little concrete information existed. In that sense, the omission had worked in Sariel's favor. She had not had to bring Issei into her official account. Still, knowing that peace talks were underway left her uneasy. So many friends, siblings, and families among the angels had been lost. Even when she tried not to dwell on it, memories persisted. Reuniting with Sandalphon had only made the pain sharper, a reminder of what had been lost. There had never been much common ground between angels and the fallen beyond a mutual appetite for destruction. Their clashes had become fierce, anime-style battles, driven by an uncompromising desire to defeat one another. A voice interrupted her thoughts before she nearly collided with the speaker. Raziel stood there, and Sariel asked what she was doing in that place. Raziel, a seraph with brown hair and green eyes who bore the 8th celestial ranking, smiled and pointed out that this was heaven, so of course she was here. Unlike Sariel, Raziel always kept her 10 white wings fully unfurled. Sariel thought back to the old structure of the seraphim. In ancient times, when God still reigned, there had been 12 seraphim who guarded heaven and served as its messengers. Michael and Gabriel first, followed by Uriel, Raphael, Metatron, Sandalphon, Raguel, Raziel, Sariel, Remiel, Chamuel, and Zadkiel. Since the Great War, Sandalphon and Zadkiel had fallen, and only their cores remained, preserving fragments of personality and power. The disappearance of God had weakened the celestial system, because the seraphim drew their strength from him. Without God, Michael could only sustain 10 seraphim, so the transition proceeded without immediate. Michael worked to maintain heaven's system, but the essential power now rested with the 10. The war's scars lingered, and Chamuel had been among the most affected. His wings dimmed until he could manifest only 4, and he turned to a quieter role as a messenger between heaven and diverse Christian churches, a position that suited his interest in meeting new people. That still left a vacancy at Sandalphon's former seat. Jophiel had risen to prominence during the war and was chosen to support the system in Sandalphon's stead, but by his own choice he kept a limited role in heaven's decisions. Lost in memory, Sariel had not noticed Raziel's soft reproach. Raziel asked if Sariel was lost in thought. Sariel confessed that she could not understand Michael's decision to pursue a peace agreement. She found it difficult to reconcile the idea of a pact with demons and fallen angels, who had been their mortal enemies and the source of so much loss. Raziel acknowledged the sentiment but urged Sariel to consider the practicalities. She reminded Sariel that their numbers had dwindled since the last war and that, even when balanced with the demons, the creation of the evil pieces system and the reincarnation of demons had caused an exponential rise in their foes. In those conditions, heaven was no longer in a position to wage a prolonged conflict. Sariel protested that they could not simply surrender without trying to fight. Raziel empathized, but stressed that unless they could increase their numbers, they would not be able to sustain a long campaign. Sariel closed her eyes and voiced her refusal, unwilling to accept the idea that they should yield without resistance. Raziel could not accept the proposal, even though it had come from Michael, and he asked whether everyone agreed. Sariel replied that, from what he had learned, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel supported the peace talks. Raguel and Ramiel remained neutral, Jophiel refused to become involved, and Metatron was indifferent. Sariel then asked Raziel about his own position. Raziel said that he could join if there was a plan, and he looked intently at Sariel. Sariel explained that he did have a plan but would need all possible help. For years he had asked Camel to work on an angelic incarnation project. Camel had been testing several methods and was finally achieving initial results. Raziel answered that this was useful, but reminded Sariel they needed more than active personnel. They needed trainers and, above all, a leader. He noted that among the exorcists who defended heaven from earth, a remarkably gifted young man had appeared. He had remained undefeated in his missions, and Michael now regarded him as a valuable asset. Unless they could secure a hero of that caliber, the plan would not work. Sariel asked for the young man's name. Raziel named him as Dulio Gesualdo, wielder of a sacred gear called Longino Zenith Tempest. Sariel admitted that Raziel might be right, but said he had met a possible candidate. The candidate was not certain, but Sariel believed that with proper guidance he could become the paladin they were seeking. Raziel concluded that with Sariel's preparations there was no time to waste. They would be very busy in the coming years. In that way, an alliance formed in the heavens. High School DxD Angelical Dragon Red Emperor. Human World City of Fuyuki. When discussing the occult, dimensional theory proposes the existence of power beyond this world, the origin of all things. That was the greatest desire of Magi, Akasha, the source or origin, and the Akashic records, which recorded the beginning and the end and everything in between. 200 years earlier, experiments had been conducted in that realm beyond the ordinary world. The Einsburn, Makiri, and Tosaka families, called the three founding houses, attempted to reproduce the Holy Grail, a subject of many traditions. Hoping that invoking the Grail would grant any wish, the three families pooled their secret arts to manifest the omnipotent container. However, the Grail could grant only one person's wish. Once that truth was known, cooperative ties were erased in bloody conflict. That was the beginning of the Holy Grail War, Heaven's Feel. From then on, every 60 years the Grail would be summoned again in Japan, in the city of Fuyuki. At that time, the Grail would select 7 magi with the power to take it and distribute large amounts of prana among them, enabling the summoning of heroic spirits called servants. The conflict concluded in a death match that determined which of the 7 was worthy to receive the Grail. Tosaka Tokiomi, a magus and heir of one of the founding houses, observed that assassin had already been summoned and wondered whether anyone knew the true identity of that servant. He discussed the matter with the contest supervisor, Kodamine Risei, inside Fuyuki Church. Risei said there was no certainty yet, but he was sure it was not the usual Hasanisaba. It had been almost a week since the summoning, but the servant remained cautious and had not returned from the astral mode. Risei added that he did know the identity of assassin's master. The master was currently in training with his son, Kirai. Tosaka was surprised that the church would take an interest in training a master and asked the reason for that decision. Risei explained that it was an order from high command and that the master was merely a novice with little knowledge. Tosaka observed that in each Grail War the Grail tended to select minor or unexpected figures to fill missing slots. This suggested the person might be insignificant, but Tosaka pressed further. Risei then revealed the true concern. The church was involved because the master happened to be a 7-year-old child. The war would begin in 3 years, and the child would be only 10 by then. For that reason, Risei asked Tosaka as an old friend to guarantee the child's safety once his servant was eliminated, and to bring him to the church immediately. Tosaka acknowledged that it was unusual for the Grail to choose a child for such a role, but he understood the worry. This was a battle among experienced magi, and it seemed wrong for a child to be involved. He agreed to protect the child after his own servant destroyed the opposing servant, and he asked for the child's name. Issei answered that the child was Hyoudou Issei. Tosaka said he did not recognize the name and wondered whether the boy had any magical potential, since otherwise the servant statistics would be terribly low, which could explain the summoning of assassin. Issei replied that his son Kirai had taken Issei as an apprentice a week earlier and claimed the boy possessed enormous magical potential, though Issei admitted he did not understand the details and that Tosaka would have to see for himself. Tosaka sighed and said the situation was disappointing. Regardless of how he viewed it, the boy had been drawn into something beyond his concern. Issei suggested that, after the war, they might offer sanctuary for the child and integrate him into the church. Tosaka considered whether they could therefore assume the boy was the seventh master. Issei answered that this was not the case, but that the seventh master had already been chosen, although he had not yet summoned a servant. Tosaka asked with concern whether that master had already registered. Issei spoke playfully that Tokiomi seemed to have forgotten why they called that irregularity the seventh master, and that they would be lucky to encounter it even after the war had begun. Tokiomi reminded himself that Issei was right. The seventh master was a wild card and an irregularity, always unexpected, yet sharing a common trait: little or no knowledge of the mage world or the Holy Grail War. Since the Second War, that kind of wild card had been a particular problem for the Tosaka. For that reason, special slots had been implemented in the apparatus that controlled servant class summons to identify them. Without information on that master, all careful planning could be undermined. Issei then reviewed what they knew about the current masters. He noted that the slots belonging to the Einsburn and the Tosaka had already been covered, and that Kenneth El Meloy Archibald had been confirmed. He added that Hyoudou Issei was also involved, and that the enigmatic seventh master made a total of 5 confirmed participants. Tokiomi asked whether there was any participant from the Matu family. Issei admitted that there was not, but he cautioned that it was still too early to rule anything out. Tokiomi observed that it was unlikely Zoken would remain idle, and that must be why Tokiomi had received a proposal that morning. Issei asked for clarification, curious about the proposal. Tokiomi explained that he had 2 daughters, Rin and Sakura, both possessing extraordinary magical potential. As head of the family, he could only choose one to inherit and learn the Tosaka mysteries, while the other would grow up without those teachings. As a father, he could not accept that outcome, so the Meadow had proposed adopting one of the girls to make her their heir and instruct her in the ways of magi. Issei asked cautiously where Tokiomi stood on that proposal. Tokiomi replied that he was uncertain. Surprisingly, his wife Aoi opposed the idea, but he had a whole year to decide and intended to use that time wisely. Issei changed the subject to other possible contenders. He pointed out that besides the Meo and the Tosaka, there were other mage lineages aligned with the Mage Association, such as Ryuruken, who had taken part in the Second War. Issei reminded Tokiomi not to forget the Sagyu, who had participated in both the Second and Third Wars and often produced habitual masters. Tokiomi acknowledged this and added that he had already examined Ryuruken. Their heirs were very young and their parents had only limited magical potential, with their crests still held by the older generation, so they posed no immediate concern. However, regarding the Sagyu, Tokiomi admitted that until yesterday he would have dismissed them as well, but since a child had recently been chosen to fight, there was now a strong possibility that the Sagyu heiress might be selected. Tokiomi recalled the girl who had been presented to him, Monica, and reflected on her prodigious nature. She had been born with an unusually high number of magical circuits and a consistent reserve of prana, and because of the ease of her magic she could not be entirely ruled out as a potential master. Issei reminded Tokiomi of another family to consider, Ozaki, with 2 heirs, Aoko and Tuko. Although young, both were exceptionally talented, and the clock tower had already taken notice. That the clock tower was watching spoke volumes, since it often distrusted Eastern mages. Given that the Aozaki family had never been chosen in past Grail Wars, Tokiomi could only wait. Noticing Tokiomi's momentary worry, Issei placed a hand on his shoulder and told him that true worth revealed itself when difficulties increased, and that Tokiomi had the support of Issei and the Holy Church. Issei insisted that, with that backing, defeat was not an option. Tokiomi bowed deeply and promised he would not forget the debt owed to the Holy Church and the Kodomine family. Issei responded that he was only fulfilling his vow for future generations of the Tosaka, and that all that remained was to pray for God's protection until Tokiomi's path led him to Akasha, the source. Tokiomi affirmed that this was what he had dedicated his life to redeem his grandfather's regrets and achieve the Tosaka's greatest desire. He resolved that in 3 years he would obtain the Grail. Father Issei promised that he would make sure of it and blessed the memory of his deceased friend Tokiomi, remarking that Tokiomi had truly left a fine heir. High School DX'd, Angelical Dragon. Red Emperor. 3 weeks later, Turin, Italy. For Hyoudou Issei, every morning began the same way. His instructor, Father Kodamine Kyriai, woke him at 5 and put him through 5 hours of grueling exercises on an empty stomach. The routine felt like torture to the boy, but Issei endured without complaint because he believed it would help him survive the imminent war that would come in 3 years. After a meager breakfast that Kyriai insisted was nutritious, combat lessons began. These were nothing like the self-defense lessons Irina's father had taught. This was real fighting. From the first moment, Kyriai had been strict with Issei. The boy had been tempted to complain, but he kept the memory of the night a certain demon had easily overwhelmed him, and that memory pushed him to keep going despite the aches and bruises. A soft voice at the doorway interrupted his thoughts. A girl about his age with platinum white hair and golden eyes entered, her expression calm and unusually composed. Her name was Karen Hortensia, Kyriai's daughter. It struck Issei as odd, since priests were not supposed to marry or have children. The difference in surnames only deepened the mystery, and Issei decided not to pry into personal matters. Karen asked if something was wrong after noticing Issei staring, and Issei offered a small smile while explaining that he was fine. Karen remarked that staring rudely was impolite, then entered the dining room. Interacting with her felt different from joking with Irina. Karen's sharp tongue often left people at a loss for words. When the three sat down, Issei noticed the tableware had changed. For the past 3 weeks the dishes had been plain white, but now Kyriai's and Issei's dinnerware were a dark green. Karen's remained the usual color. Surprised by the weight of the cup, Issei looked to his master for an explanation. Kyriai explained that each cup weighed 20 kilos and that Issei's body had been conditioned enough to handle the next level of training. Issei objected, thinking only his skills needed improvement, but Kyriai warned him not to grow complacent. Kyriai reminded him that while some of the burden in a war might fall to a servant, Issei was facing experienced mages and could not rely on luck. He pointed out the difference between their ages and experience and urged Issei to compensate for it. Issei listened closely. It was the first time his instructor had offered such a detailed rationale rather than issuing orders. Kyriai continued, raising his own cup effortlessly and explaining that without compensating, Issei would not be able to overcome his foes. The Holy Grail War was a fight for survival, and every possible skill or advantage would be necessary unless Issei chose to give up and hope for luck. Those words resonated with Issei and brought back the memory of his helplessness that night, hardening his resolve not to surrender. Kyriai added that the cup exercise was only the beginning. Starting the next day, Issei would wear weighted vests to get used to carrying more. Normally the vests were 50 kilos, but because Issei was still young and developing, they would start at 30 kilos. He was to wear them at all times except during sparring and sleep. As Issei adapted, Kyriai said, he would increase both the number and weight of the items he had to carry. Kyriai finished the explanation by urging them to eat before the food cooled and reminding Issei that if he could not keep to the schedule, he would have to train without food. Issei tried to lift his cup and struggled, but managed to drink half of its contents before beginning to eat. As usual, the priest's cooking was disappointingly spicy. Kyriai called it spicy tofu stew, though Issei could barely digest it. Karen, however, ate it without fuss. Perhaps it ran in the family. Issei asked if there could be a different breakfast, and Karen declared theatrically that food was a blessing and that such a delicious meal deserved praise worthy of the finest restaurants. Kyriai agreed that not everyone could enjoy the dish and said he did not want to appear unreasonable. He emphasized that since Issei would continue the training, he should eat something that satisfied him while keeping caloric needs in mind. Issei brightened at the thought of better food. Kyriai then said it would be best for Issei to learn to cook for himself, which left Issei stunned because he did not know how to cook. When Issei asked whether the kitchen was part of the plan, Kuoh explained that every kitchen utensil weighed over 20 kilos and that Issei would only be able to use them if he could enter the kitchen, as the pantry door itself weighed 500 kilos. Issei felt crushed by the figure and inwardly wished he could disappear on the spot. Issei complained that it felt unbearably heavy. Seeing his dejected expression, Karen remarked to Kuoh that she thought it was useless and that he would probably give up in 2 or 3 days. Kuoh replied calmly that the decision had to be Issei's own. He had only been assigned to train him, and the effort would only work if Issei was willing. If not, Kuoh would report to his superiors. Issei insisted with conviction that he would not give up and that he would complete the training and become stronger. With that, everyone returned to their breakfast. He managed to eat only half of his meal before going to a room to begin a sparring lesson with his instructor. For the first half hour, Issei simply endured the blows. Kuoh had not been offering instruction, so Issei tried to block using his own instincts. Gradually he adapted. Where in the first week he had collapsed within seconds of the fight starting, 3 weeks in he could now hold out for 5 minutes before succumbing. This session, however, was different. Kuoh began pointing out flaws in Issei's posture, and they spent the entire afternoon adjusting his stances. It was the first time Issei had received individual instruction, so it was new to go through posture after posture while Kuoh corrected the alignment of his body and the position of his feet. At first the changes seemed trivial. Issei wondered whether it really mattered if his front foot was turned slightly outward instead of inward. When Kuoh had him switch from one corrected stance to another, Issei was surprised by how different it felt. Kuoh then explained the purpose behind each correction. The placement of the foot affected how the knee bent and allowed for smoother retreats from powerful attacks. Better knee flex enabled a faster kick from that leg. After each explanation, Kuoh guided Issei through the complete motion and made him repeat it at least 3 times so the proper form would be etched into his memory. They moved on to punches and blocks combined with the adjusted stances. Everything flowed more naturally than Issei remembered. The new level of training was not only about conditioning his body but also about developing experience in close-quarters combat. Issei noted Kuoh's professional, somewhat monotone voice as he described each movement, and he found himself grateful that the methodical instruction helped him improve. Time passed faster than Issei expected. By the time they had covered the basics, it was almost night, and when they sparred again, Issei demonstrated a substantial improvement in defending attacks, lasting 10 minutes before being defeated by his instructor twice as long as usual. With a little time left before dinner, Kuoh offered a brief explanation of the training's purpose. Ordinary people have an internal limit on the force they will use. Even if they try to consciously add power, the body often ignores it and weakness results. Magic was even more demanding because its activation exacted a price from the body. Intensive training could deactivate that limiter, and martial arts were especially effective because they used every ounce of force the body had available, allowing practitioners to draw out energy the body normally held back. Issei listened in amazement while staring at his fists. Kuoh told him the upcoming week would be more intensive because once his magic instructor arrived, their schedules would be divided so he could focus on both physical training and magical study. Kuoh left to prepare dinner while Issei did additional exercises to ready his body, looking forward to learning magic as a change of pace from strict physical training. 1 week later, in Turin, Italy, Kjelovich, the instructor sent to teach him magic, warned that while studying magic, death would always be close at hand. Those words settled heavily in the boy's chest. He felt apprehensive about this new field and tried to recall when magic had stopped feeling fun and had become so dangerous. Issei did not know whether to feel grateful or cheated. When the angel camel had mentioned having contacts among magic users, he had pictured a wizard or witch in vivid robes with an arcane book and a staff, based on illustrations he and Irina had looked at before the incident. What stood before him instead was a woman who looked like an ordinary office worker. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with platinum blonde hair, aquamarine eyes that brightened her features, and fair skin. Her expression shifted between surprise and mild disapproval. Keed frowned and rubbed the bridge of her nose, remarking with fatigue that lately she felt more like a babysitter than a mage. Issei protested that he was not a child. Kuoh scolded him for typical brat behavior, saying she had been sent to teach him magic but had not yet seen true aptitude. She introduced herself as Kuoh Jelovich, stumbling briefly while trying to remember Issei's full name. The boy replied tiredly that his name was Hyoudou Issei. Kuoh confirmed that she remembered correctly. Kuoh began the lesson by explaining that, since she did not know his name, she could only assume he was a first-generation mage and that there was much to teach. They would start with the basics. She proceeded to describe the hidden side of the world. Kuoh clarified that, despite people calling it magic, what they practiced was not simply sorcery. The occult arts were divided into two categories. The first was the thaumaturgy they performed, and the second was true magic, which only 5 people in the world had ever achieved. The difference lay in the laws of the world. Any hidden art that reproduced known phenomena without breaking the world's laws was called thaumaturgy, while anything that ignored those laws was true magic. Issei took notes and asked who determined those laws. Kuoh emphasized that the world itself was the system of rules that governed the planet and that it was crucial to understand its scope. She used gravity as an example, explaining that gravity varies across planets and that such differences were part of the world's laws. In short, the world determined the laws. She taught Issei, in a structured way, about the world and the two opposing forces that existed on the planet, Gaia and Aleya. Kuoh described Aleya as the unconscious collective will of humanity, a force that sought the species' survival. Aleya constantly protected humanity from extinction and confronted threats with overwhelming force. Usually Aleya intervened indirectly, guiding and empowering individuals to eliminate dangers, but when indirect measures were insufficient, Aleya deployed the beasts of Aleya. The counter-guardians were among those beasts. Their deployment was never subtle. A threat would be destroyed by any means necessary, regardless of collateral damage. Kuoh gave the sinking of Atlantis as an example of Aleya's ruthless method of eliminating a civilization to neutralize the threat. Gaia, by contrast, was the planet's will to survive. Gaia protected all living things on Earth, but as humanity developed independence from nature, Gaia increasingly viewed humans as a threat because of reckless environmental destruction. Gaia produced its own agents to reduce or eliminate the human threat when necessary. Those agents included elemental beings, creatures of the planet, and the most dangerous creations such as primate murder and the true ancestors. The true ancestors were powerful spiritual beings created by Gaia as copies of a model called Crimson Moon, intended to serve as kings and guides for humanity in an attempt to stop humans from destroying the planet. These forces could be described as the planet's balancing agents. Kuoh summarized that the true ancestors collectively were the force of balance, while the counterforce, acting as a deterrent, was the security mechanism formed by the unconscious collective. She reviewed. The world consisted of two components, Gaia and Aleya. Gaia was the planet's will to survive and prosper. Aleya was the unconscious collective will of humanity to avoid extinction. Since humans originated from Earth, Aleya had once been part of Gaia, but as humanity grew independent of nature, Aleya diverged and now no longer aligned fully with Gaia. This divergence created the potential for great conflict. Kuoh added that, despite being called the will of the planet or humanity, both forces had no emotions. They were more like passive spirals of energy responding to threats of planetary destruction or human extinction. Both forces were always active, guiding humanity and the planet away from danger, and they usually acted indirectly to remain unnoticed. Issei, still confused, mimed a spiral with his hand and asked how intangible spirals of energy could save the planet or humanity. Kuoh laughed and explained that, although Gaia and Aleya were intangible, each could create physical agents to handle threats too great for indirect intervention. Gaia's agents, the beasts of Gaia, included elemental beings and planetary creatures like the true ancestors and primate murder. Aleya's agents, the beasts of Aleya, were human spirits who had pledged eternal service to Aleya in exchange for favors during their lifetimes. Counter-guardians belonged to this second group. The boy reflected on the power the world held and how it reacted to threats. He asked what criteria the forces used to resolve untenable situations. Kuoh answered that both forces had immense power, but they only unleashed the amount necessary to address a specific event. If a threat had energy amount X, the counter force would deploy enough energy to neutralize X and eliminate the danger. The energy could be applied subtly, creating coincidences to move people out of harm's way, or on a massive scale capable of submerging a continent. Issei struggled to grasp how dangerous the world he had come to inhabit was. He briefly questioned whether the effort was worth it, but then thought of his servant, his friend, and his parents, and of his conviction to become powerful enough to save people. He continued listening. Kuoh observed his resolve and, with a note of disapproval, said that was all for the current lesson and that they would continue tomorrow. Before he decided whether to keep taking classes, she explained the principles by which she lived. She presented them as the guiding rules for a mage. The essence of a mage was not found in life but in death. The first step for a mage was to accept death. Death would always be at a mage's side while studying the arts, and studying magic meant moving away from common sense. Kuoh warned Issei that when he died, he would truly die, and when he had to kill, he would have to kill. She told him that even the simplest magic could harbor a flaw that might take the caster's life and that magic was a path that tended towards self-destruction. She watched his unsettled expression with a faint satisfaction, then prepared to leave the classroom. Kuoh told him that she had come to teach, but that it was up to him whether he wanted to become more involved in the hidden world. She examined the marks on the boy's right hand and said she thought he was already deeply entangled, yet did not need to dig any further. She felt a normal life would suit him better, but insisted the choice belonged to him. Kuoh cautioned that if his choices led to death, he must accept those consequences only if the desire behind them was truly his. She explained that fighting of one's own free will meant accepting any crimes or consequences as one's own creation, while fighting on behalf of others would only lead to despair and agony. She asked him to think it over. Issei lowered his face to the ground, unable to respond. Kuoh assured him she had no problem teaching thaumaturgy, since she had been hired for that purpose, and hoped that when he made his decision he would not regret it because there would be no turning back. With that, Kuoh left the room and the boy was left confused. The next day, after Issei's usual routines, Kodomine Kirai stepped away and left teacher and student to continue their lessons. Kirai introduced Kuoh Jelovich as an independent mercenary and professional assassin while watching the interaction between Issei and the woman. A voice behind him commented that it was hard to believe Kuoh was a first-class magus and that she seemed to lack the pride expected of a mage. The speaker noted that Kuoh had once been slated to serve as an assistant in the Directorate of Spiritual Evocation at the Clock Tower years ago, but had abandoned that path to become a freelancer and was now teaching a child, an act that must have embarrassed the 9 generations of the Jelovich family. Kirai turned and saw 2 people. One was his father, Kodomine Issei. The other was a man Kirai had never met before, dressed entirely in red with the bearing and elegance of an old aristocrat. This man exuded confidence in every gesture. Issei introduced the newcomer as an old family friend, Tosaka Tokiomi. Tosaka Tokiomi offered a courteous greeting and extended his hand. Kirai noticed the circular marks on Tokiomi's palm during the handshake. After the formalities, Kirai asked about the Holy Grail War, wondering what a contender for that contest was doing here. Issei observed that Kirai had likely received the church's orders the previous day and that his meeting with Tokiomi was intended to organize the details of those orders. He explained that although the object bore the name Holy Grail, they had long known that Fuyuki's Grail was not a relic of the Son of God. Issei said that, despite that truth, the Grail of Fuyuki remained too powerful to ignore. It was an omnipotent object that could grant wishes, and if it fell into the wrong hands no one could predict what might be unleashed. Tosaka Tokiomi poured a glass of wine and, with a composed smile, suggested that if they could place the Grail in the hands of someone trustworthy, the problem would be solved. Issei agreed and noted that the Tosaka family, as descendants of Magi, had long-standing ties with the church. For that reason they could place trust in Tokiomi and the clarity of his intentions toward the Grail. Tosaka Tokiomi spoke reverently of Asha, the source, and said that the pursuit of Akasha was the singular desire of the Tosaka family. He added that, together with the other 2 founding families, Einsburn and Meta, they had designed the ritual for that purpose, though it seems some had since forgotten that original aim. Issei explained that the nature of the ritual required 7 magi to act as masters and that, apart from the Tosaka, the other participants appeared more interested in the wishes the Grail might grant than in any original purpose. Kirai looked at Tokiomi and said he had no idea what kinds of people would enter such a brutal contest, and noted with a frown that not all participants could be trusted. Issei then reminded him that the church's orders were absolute and that, to ensure the contest remained secret and controlled, the church had sent an arbiter to supervise since the last war had proven savage. He stated that Kirai's father would oversee the conflict, just as he had 60 years earlier, and that because of this it would not be strange for Kirai to assist his father. Issei proposed that once the ritual began, Kirai should participate as Tokiomi's assistant to help secure the Grail. Kirai questioned whether the church was not supposed to remain neutral. Issei answered that, outwardly, they must appear neutral, but in reality they would cooperate and join their forces to defeat the other 6 masters and thereby secure victory. Tokiomi wore a calm expression as the meeting drew to a close. Issei asked Kirai if he had any questions. Kirai, the young priest, fixed his gaze on the 2 men and asked what the point was of training Hyoudou Issei, the master of assassin, if the church intended to give the Grail to Tosaka Tokiomi. Both men frowned slightly. Issei answered that Kirai was right to be confused at first, but the reason was simple: the boy had to survive the war. The church could not entrust such matters to a child without ensuring he could be a reliable resource. Depending on his training, Issei might prove a valuable asset to support Tokiomi. An additional servant would be a significant help in the coming conflict. Kirai thought the church's neutrality as arbiter had become a facade, but he set aside his personal opinion because he had a duty to fulfill. Kirai acknowledged this and said they would meet again in 3 years, during the 4th Heaven's Feel. Tokiomi, with an arrogant expression, said he was glad an agreement had been reached and requested to see the boy's potential before leaving. Kirai then departed. Keed waited for her prospective student and asked what he had decided. Her question was concise and cold, intended to leave no room for halves. Issei's determined eyes answered for him. He understood that nothing could be protected without risking his own life. He formally requested that Keed teach him not only thaumaturgy but everything about the dangerous world he would face. Keed sighed and agreed to begin. What followed felt like hell to Issei. Keed explained that performing thaumaturgy required opening a person's magic circuits. As a first-generation mage, Issei theoretically should have few or no circuits, but when they attempted to open them they discovered some were already active while most remained dormant. Activating circuits for the first time meant intense sensation, and Issei accepted that pain as part of the path he had chosen when he had altered his soul with Sandalphon in order to gain power for his goals. Following Keed's instructions, Issei sat on the floor in meditation, hands on his knees, and focused on slow, controlled breathing to isolate himself from the outside. He built a mental image to trigger his circuits and guided his magical core to push energy through them. At first 1 circuit opened, then 3, then 5. As he learned to circulate his prana, the number grew. Where the average was around 20, he found far more. Almost without realizing it, he had opened 40 circuits. Keed warned that the sensations would grow unbearable with each opening, but instead of sharp pain, Issei felt a deep numbness and a spreading cold that chilled him to the core. He pressed on. He reached 50 circuits when an interrupted, distorted sound broke his concentration, words fragmented as if through static. Fragments of the voice drifted in and out, unintelligible, like a distant transmission breaking apart. Issei felt himself slipping into a spiral, his core expanding as if ready to burst and his control slipping away. Sandalphon then shouted inside him for Issei to wake up. Sandalphon's cry snapped Issei out of meditation. The scene before him was literally and figuratively chilling. The entire room was coated in frost, with sharp icicles forming in various places. A circular ring of fire stood between him and a shimmering barrier that held a faint, wavering bubble. Inside that bubble, Keed appeared battered and shaken. Part of her clothing had been torn, but she still had her hand raised as though containing or restraining something. Behind her stood a man in red robes holding a staff crowned with a glowing red crystal. Keed's voice was weak as the bubble faded. Issei looked at the frozen room and, trembling, wondered whether he had caused it. Kuoh stepped forward, though her eyes were obscured by the fringe of her hair. Issei attempted to apologize, but Kuoh clenched her fists in anger. Her expression remained hard to read beneath her hair. Kuoh explained that she had been saved by a miracle. She had acted a magical barrier in time, and if the man with the staff had unleashed his most powerful fire magic without that barrier, both she and Issei would have suffered grave harm. Her tone was cold and unforgiving, making Issei feel like the worst person in the world. He lowered his eyes and tears began to form as he wondered what he had been doing. His goal had been to save people, not hurt them. He insisted that he had tried to do as his instructor had told him. Kuoh rebuked him, pointing out that this was the result of ignoring her warnings. She reminded him that even the simplest magic could fail and cause death, and that a single misstep could have ended them all by his hand. As Kuoh spoke, despair settled over him. Kuoh accused him of making his mana explode and endangering everyone. She noted that it had not even been a day since he entered this world and warned that he seemed eager to stain his hands with blood. Her words crushed him. He fell to his knees, overwhelmed by guilt. Then a sudden backlash surged through him like a violent shock. He felt intense, searing pain that forced him to double over and brought waves of nausea. He retched and the agony worsened. A man nearby observed that there was a rejection reaction. The last thing he registered as he slipped into unconsciousness was both of them moving closer to him. Kuoh Jelovich, the magic instructor of Hyoudou Issei, watched her pupil sleep. Thanks to her advanced healing magic, she had left the boy in stable condition. As she watched him rest, she remembered the path that had led her here. Kuoh was the third daughter of the eighth head of the Jelovich family, a Russian household affiliated with the Magic Association. Because she was not the eldest, she had been passed over for the family's heirship in favor of her older brother. She had not surrendered to that fate. With her mother's support, she studied thaumaturgy and later went to the prestigious Clock Tower, the association's center of research and power. Acting against her family's wishes, she had to overcome every test and barrier set by the association before she could become a student and apprentice under notable magi. Her research into healing magic and its applications in summoning, necromancy, and elemental control raised her to the rank of a first-class magus, and she was close to achieving the grand rank, the highest in the association. Then everything went downhill. Her talent and noble lineage attracted the attention of Kenneth Elmeloy Archibald, a prominent member of the Department of Ulysses who sought to force an engagement. Kenneth was arrogant and insufferable despite his skill in thaumaturgy, and Kuoh could not imagine binding herself to a man like him. Memories of past family strife drove her to refuse. She had underestimated the political brutality of the Clock Tower. The tower was more than an institute of research. It was a mortal fight for influence, with internal conflicts, factional battles, and struggles over resources. It was not surprising that the Archibalds recruited allies to punish the one who had humiliated their heir. Those allies included the Bartholomew enemies worse than she could have imagined. Despite all precautions, her downfall was swift. Only her talent saved her from being forcibly sealed, but the hostile climate in the association forced her to abandon everything and become a freelancer. The transition was brutal. She had to convert all her knowledge into practical combat and accept any job that came her way, from recovering artifacts to assassination contracts. During her travels, she encountered many people and supernatural beings, including the self-proclaimed Angel Camel, with whom she cooperated on several recovery missions. Weary of that life, she took one final job hunting a renegade mage. The building where the mage and an accomplice were hiding caught fire during the operation. She eliminated both targets and, while leaving the rubble, found a child with faint vital signs. She wrestled with the decision to abandon him or care for him, and ultimately she chose to bring him with her. A tattoo on the child's right hand marked powerful magic, command seals. That discovery might have remained an anecdote if days later she had not received a lucrative offer to become an instructor for another mage. The pay was more than enough to accept, and that was how she met Hyoudou Issei. Unlike the child she had found, Issei had already summoned his servant. Kuoh, placing her hands on the boy's forehead to check his condition, reflected wryly that she had not expected her teaching skills to be so rusty as to nearly cost her students their lives in the first lesson. A voice behind her, the man who had been assisting, agreed that it had been a close call. Kuoh rebuked him for the bluntness of his remark. Kuoh told her interlocutor that it was not unusual for the association of mages to hold Eastern magi in such low esteem as she turned to face him and asked what he was doing there, addressing Tosaka Tokiomi by name. Tosaka Tokiomi replied with arrogance that it was an odd way to speak to someone who had saved her life and that the 9 generations of the Jelovich should be deeply ashamed. Kuoh answered fiercely that this was a matter between a master and an apprentice and that he had no business interfering. Tosaka Tokiomi said he had only come to visit an old friend who lived nearby and that he was leaving. He instructed them to take good care of the boy, warning that the boy's great potential must not be wasted and that it would be the only thing to save him when they met again in the 4th heaven's field. He then departed, leaving Kuoh visibly irritated. Kuoh told the sleeping boy Hyoudou Issei that he had better recover quickly because she had not yet punished him for that irresponsible use of magic. That was the only wish of recovery the master offered her apprentice. Hours later, Issei opened his eyes in his room. It was still night, darkness lay over the outside of the house. He tried to recall everything from his magical training and grew despondent at how poorly he had performed, wondering inwardly whether he had the talent to achieve his dreams. Assassin materialized in the room in a small shimmer of blue particles and asked if he was all right. Issei smiled faintly and, attempting a rebuke, told Assassin that it had been a while since she had spoken with him and that she did not need to call him master. His name was Issei. Assassin apologized and explained that she had used her presence concealment ability to detect any enemies who might approach and to prevent them from knowing his location. Issei asked in a friendly tone whether she was always so cautious, wondering how anyone could find them to fight there. Assassin commented with disapproval that she sometimes forgot her master was still a child. Issei asked what she meant, confused. Assassin explained that, for example, the man in the red suit was a master as well. Whether by coincidence or intent, he had come to their area and now knew Issei's status as a master. Issei lowered his head in concern and then looked out at the calm night, noting that it was the first peaceful night he had had in a long time. He reflected that last month's training had left him so exhausted he barely noticed the time. Assassin asked if something was wrong, worried. Issei replied quietly that nothing was wrong, unless one counted his disastrous first magic class, and his voice carried sadness. Assassin asked if he was sure he wanted to continue, reminding him that he could still withdraw and that much of the burden in the Holy Grail War would fall on her. Issei turned onto his back and admitted that everything had happened so quickly and that his instructor had been serious when she warned he could die. He confessed he was truly scared. Assassin began to respond, but Issei cut in. Issei said that when he thought of people who might be suffering out there, he could not be selfish and focus only on himself. Assassin cautioned that caring for others was good but should not come at the expense of one's own well-being, which would be neither healthy nor advisable. Issei acknowledged the point but insisted he could not stop. He said that having met her already made it too late to turn back. Once he knew about this world, he could not pretend ignorance and return to his old life. Sandalphon then reached out and asked if he was sure. Issei asked Sandalphon where he had been, noting that Sandalphon had not spoken to him for a month. Sandalphon replied that he had rested and examined the modifications he had made to Issei's soul, and he apologized for the incident earlier, taking responsibility for it. Issei asked what Sandalphon meant, confused. Sandalphon explained that when they found Issei, he had been nearly dead and his soul was about to disconnect from his body. Sandalphon said he had made modifications using Issei's life force to create the necessary circuits to summon a servant. Issei acknowledged that explanation and wondered why Sandalphon apologized. Sandalphon admitted he had erred by not properly accounting for Issei's vast, dormant talents. In order to create the circuits, he had exchanged and sacrificed those hidden talents, leaving Issei with more than 1,000 magical circuits. Issei struggled to understand and thought that even if he had had such talent it would not have helped at the time. He thanked Sandalphon for saving his life and noted that with so many circuits his magic should be more powerful. Sandalphon corrected him, explaining that having so many circuits could make it difficult to control magical energy and could prevent proper activation of spells. Issei asked whether that made his power useless, feeling some regret. Sandalphon reassured him that it was not entirely useless. Sandalphon had been able to recover one of Issei's talents, his sacred gear. Sandalphon said he would explain sacred gear later. The other talent had been damaged, but Sandalphon could recover part of it because it was linked to his power, and he would decide what to do with the surplus circuits. For now, Issei should use the 60 circuits that had been activated to help him control his magical power. Sandalphon added that he would be very busy and that they might not speak for a long time, asking if Issei understood. Issei accepted Sandalphon's decision and told him not to blame himself. Sandalphon had saved his life and helped give him the power to save his parents, for which Issei would always be grateful. Sandalphon added that Issei should ask his servant to help him train with the sword, since Sandalphon's power was linked to swords, and then said goodbye. Assassin listened with curiosity and asked what Sandalphon had said. Issei recounted Sandalphon's explanations and then asked Assassin if she would teach him to use a sword. Assassin showed surprise but then smiled and agreed, on the condition that no one else was watching. Issei thanked Assassin, and after he finished telling her everything Sandalphon had said, they prepared to sleep and face the coming days. 2 years later, in a village far from Rome, a sunny day unfolded at a small orphanage. A man in a white suit walked among the children, watching them play and enjoy their childhood. 2 children were being gently scolded by an older man, who told them to stop. The man warned the children that they must never resort to violence against a friend and that they could not hope for heaven if they did. One of the boys apologized to the priest with a contrite voice. The priest explained that the only people it was ever acceptable to use force against were monsters and pagans, then looked toward the man in the white robe and gave his final instructions to the children, telling them to return to their room. The boys answered in unison and excitement and went on their way. As the children left, the man in the gray cassock walked in the opposite direction, moving slowly as if waiting for the man in the white robe to catch up. The man in the white robe asked what business his companion had and what problem needed attention. He appeared to be in his 30s, with short, spiky blonde hair, green eyes, a square, strong jaw, and a prominent wedge-shaped scar on his left cheek. Tall, lean, and broad-shouldered, he wore round glasses and a large gray cassock with white trim and a blue lining, black trousers, black boots, a black shirt with a blue trim and a clerical collar, white gloves, and a silver cross that sometimes glinted gold on a chain around his neck. Inscriptions ran across the backs of his gloved hands. The right glove read Jesus Christ is in heaven and the left read Iscariot section 13. His older companion, who wore a white cassock without a cross at the collar and round glasses, explained that there had been a large number of strange incidents recently in different parts of the world. The man in the white robe acknowledged that the church's various agencies had been eliminating those threats. He noted that most of the cases involved low-ranking vampires, but their numbers had been unusually high. The executors of the Holy Church were doing a good job containing them, he added. The older man said they had traced the source of the problem to Northern Ireland, to a small village called Badrick, which seemed to be the lair of a dead apostle. They had established a cordon and would need to move quickly. The man in the white robe asked when they would depart. The older man said they were leaving that same day, but hesitated and then revealed that a child would participate in the expedition. The child was named Hyoudou Issei. The younger man scoffed at the idea of sending a child, asking why the church would entrust someone like Issei to their care and insisting that such a heretic had no place within the Vatican. The older man responded that High Command planned to send the boy to a special division. When the younger man asked what division could possibly be considered appropriate, the older man told him the name, the Burial Agency. The Burial Agency was an elite, secretive unit assassins among assassins, experts among experts. Small in number, it was the most efficient corps of inquisitors, 8 members in total, 7 active and 1 in reserve. They were the church's method of combating extraordinary threats by matching force with force. Their ranks were filled not by those chosen for piety but by those who possessed enough power to confront the supernatural on their own and prevail. The organization could even grant a formal blessing if that helped resolve a moral dilemma. Burial agency members tended to operate alone, only allying with foreign organizations when absolutely necessary. When they did work together, however, they formed a coherent team. Though the church generally viewed the burial agency with suspicion, it accepted them as useful and necessary. The church deployed them judiciously because it was valuable to have operatives capable of neutralizing a supernatural being by sheer force, without relying on exorcism. Typical members ranged from taboos-defying sorcerers to weapon-obsessed specialists and ruthless fighters, dangerous, highly skilled operatives who could confront vampires and other threats up close. The younger man admitted he felt uneasy about involving someone so young with that agency, but the older man reassured him that the boy would not be on the front line. For now, the boy's role would be observational, to watch the battle and gain experience from the encounter unless his help was truly needed. The man in the white robe laughed at the idea for a moment, then accepted the arrangement. He said he would see whether the child's devotion to their cause was sincere. If the boy's convictions did not align with their mission, he would remove him from consideration. He then spoke with fervor about their purpose. They were instruments of the church, both bound and not bound by titles, those who stood to seek forgiveness on behalf of others and to remove threats to the faithful. He called himself and his comrades soldiers of their Lord and declared that it was time to deal with the monsters. Those who rejected the Lord would face judgment. Alexander Anderson smiled and spoke a fanatical prayer, invoking the Lord and saying Amen. At the same time, in Turin, Italy, a 9-year-old boy chopped wood for the kitchen, the logs piling up quickly. Metal clamps covered nearly the entire length of his arms and legs, and a metal vest weighed on his torso, but he continued his task without complaint. A girl of the same age, Karen, approached and informed him that their father was calling Issei. Issei stopped his work and responded to Karen with deep respect and calm that he would be with his master shortly. Karen nodded and walked back toward the house. After washing up and changing into his regular clothes, Issei went to find his mentor, Kodomine Kirai, who had been in the study of the house where they had lived for the past 2 years. Issei respectfully told Kodomine that he had been summoned. Kodomine noted that 2 years had passed and that Issei had made great progress in his training. It was time to move to the next level. Kodomine explained that Issei needed battlefield experience to determine the training required for his final year before the Fuyuki ritual. Issei asked where he would be sent. Kodomine informed him that he would be sent to Badrick, a village in Northern Ireland. Technically, he would not be entering the main battle, but the primary objective was to eliminate a dead apostle. There had also been a call for help near the village, and Issei's task would be to investigate the area and secure any survivors. Kodomine told him they would depart in an hour and instructed him to prepare with everything he needed before leaving. After a brief nod, the boy left the room. He looked up at the blue sky bright with sunlight as he walked back to his room and thought that at last he would know whether he could protect his ideals and his dreams. With that thought, the boy prepared for his first mission.